Welcome back to the Murder Tapes Podcast, Season 5, Episode 3. I hope you all had a great weekend. Wilson and I just got back from Colorado, and it was so much fun. We actually hiked our first 14er, Mount Quandary, and saw so many mountain goats. I was so terrified at first, but they were all so sweet. And the weather was literally perfect. Since we've been back in Texas, it's all I can think about. I really miss Colorado, and we're definitely planning on returning soon. Today's case is on the Adolph Coors III murder, and you may recognize the name Coors as it's the name of one of the most popular beers. The Coors Brewery has been in business for over 150 years, and it's actually the 5th largest brewery in the world. Author Philip Jett, who wrote a book titled The Death of an Heir, Adolph Coors III, and the Murder That Rocked an American Brewing Dynasty would say, quote, "The Coors Brewery, the Coors family, the Coors name, the Coors money, the Coors power. If you didn't know Coors and you lived in Colorado, something was wrong." At 8 a.m. on February 9, 1960, Coors chairman Adolph Coors III got in his station wagon and headed towards the Coors Brewery in Golden, Colorado. It was a 12-mile drive, and when he never arrived, his family began to worry. A milkman found Adolph's car on the one-lane Turkey Creek Bridge. His station wagon's engine was still running, and the radio was playing. Investigators arrived shortly after and saw a blood stain in the dirt. There's also a creek under this bridge, and they found a lens from Adolph's glasses as well as 2 hats. One was a brown fedora and the other was Adolph's baseball cap. The story goes as follows. A man named Joseph Corbett purposefully stopped his car in the middle of the one-way bridge and popped his hood open in order to get Adolph to stop and help him. When Adolph approached him, Joseph said he was having engine trouble and asked if he could get his help to push the car and give him a ride to the nearest service station. Joseph then tried to attack Adolph, which led him to try and run away. While doing so, Adolph was shot twice at close range in the right shoulder blade. It is believed that Adolph's glasses fell off after his body hit the wooden railing. Joseph then grabbed Adolph's body and traveled 20 miles south, taking only back roads. Throughout this hectic car ride, Joseph's car would get covered in mud. He then stopped near a wooden dump and grabbed Adolph's body to get it out of the car. Adolph was covered in his own blood, and the ground was covered in snow. It's worth noting that someone heard noises in this area and mentioned it sounded like a gunshot, but because this was a popular hunting area, they thought nothing of it. She described it as, quote, "a very loud report, much louder than a .22 rifle or something that I have heard around the place." She also compared it to lightning hitting a tree. During cross-examination, she said she only heard one such shot, quote, "unless there were 2 so close together that it sounded as one." Another witness who lived about 1.5 miles away testified that while she was hanging clothes, she also heard a shot. She stated it came from the direction right from where the bridge is or around the way. The following day, Adolph's wife, Mary Grant Coors, received a ransom letter. It read, "Dear Miss Coors, your husband has been kidnapped. His car is by Turkey Creek. Call the police or FBI, he dies. Cooperate, he lives. Ransom, $200,000 in 10s and $300,000 in 20s. There will be no negotiating. Bills need to be used, non-consecutive, unrecorded, and unmarked. Warning, we will know if you call the police or record the serial numbers. Directions. Place money and this letter envelope in one suitcase or bag. Have 2 men with a car ready to make the delivery. When all set, advertise a tractor for sale in Denver Post, Section 69. Sign Ad King Ranch, Fort Lupton. Wait at NA 94455 for instructions after ad appears. Deliver immediately after receiving call. Any delay will be regarded as a stall to set up a stakeout. Understand this. Adolph's life is in your hands. We have no desire to commit murder. All we want is that money. If you follow the instructions, he will be released unharmed within 48 hours after the money is received. Adolph's dad, Adolph Coors Jr., called J. Edgar Hoover, who was the FBI director at the time, and Hoover sent out more men to work on this case than the Lindbergh kidnapping. If you're not aware of the Lindbergh case, I'll be covering it in a separate episode soon. Hoover also gave the case a code name, Cornap. Reporters would stop his father and ask him questions. Quote, "Mr. Coors, a few words about your son, sir, please. I am dealing with crooks who are in business, Mr. Coors replied. They have something I want to buy. My son. The price is secondary. So you've been told your son's definitely kidnapped? No, but logic tells me he has been kidnapped. It is a matter of now waiting for an offer. It's like any other business transaction at this point. You're treating the kidnapping of your son like a business deal? That's what it is. Besides, I cannot be emotional about this. Any idea who'd want to kidnap your son? The Union? Asked another reporter. I don't know. No, we don't have any enemies in Golden. Excuse us, we have to board now. Adolph's wife and father did exactly what was asked. They secured the cash from a Boston bank and organized the ransom money in the proper denominations. The $500,000 was then delivered to Golden, and they waited for a call from the kidnapper. 4 people, including Adolph's second daughter Cecily, reported seeing a suspicious man who was sitting in his car with a rifle in the front seat. Agents were able to obtain parts of the license plate number and traced it to a vehicle in East Denver. It led them to a dealership that the kidnapper purchased it from. The alias, Walter Osborne, was ran through Colorado's driver's license records, and from there, they found a fingerprint on file. And that fingerprint matched an escaped murderer from California. The Forensic File episode on this case breaks down how the FBI was able to identify Adolph's murder. Joseph Corbett Jr., who was using the alias Walter Osborne. I'm now going to play the audio for you.
The FBI's document examiners carefully studied the typed ransom note for clues. First, they dusted the letter for fingerprints and didn't find any. But they noticed right away that the typist was proficient.
The typist here leaves 2 spaces after a period. That's what you were taught to do in typing class. There don't appear to be any typos, no misstriking of the keys here. Overall, a very good job of typing.
And the typeface was distinctive.
The type style we're looking at here was made by a Swiss firm named CTAG.
This proprietary typeface was used by 2 typewriter manufacturers, Hermes in Switzerland and the Royal McBee Company in Holland. The numerals in the ransom letter told the story.
You could differentiate between the Hermes and the Royalite by the numerals. They're round numerals, so the bottom of the 5 or the bottom of the 3 come back up. They're even with the baseline of the other letters, like the M or N.
So the document examiners concluded that the kidnapper used a Royalite portable typewriter. Finding it wouldn't be easy.
That factory was turning out the Royalite Portable, which was a specific model sold by Royal as part of their line of portables in the late 50s and early 60s. $49.95 list, sold widely, in department stores and various other outlets throughout the U.S.
And the FBI noticed one more thing. The kidnapper's typewriter had a tiny defect. The letter S was lower than all the others.
So that letter S being low would be one characteristic pointing towards the work product of a particular machine.
While the typewriter analysis was going on, the FBI got a number of possible leads. The most promising was from a man who saw an automobile parked near the kidnapping site.
There was a man near the bridge who was guarding his mines, and he told the police that he had seen a car there. There was an early 1950s model of a Mercury sedan. And he even remembered part of the license plate number because he was afraid it was somebody who was coming out to disturb his mines.
The man said he remembered the sequence. AT62 in the license. Within the greater Denver area, police found 4 Mercury sedans with AT62 in the license number. Naturally, the FBI checked all of them. But one in particular caught their attention. It was registered to a man named Walter Osborne, who bought the car just 1 month earlier. When the FBI went to Osborne's apartment in downtown Denver, it was empty. He had moved out the day after the kidnapping and left no forwarding address.
Joseph's vehicle was found burning in a dump in Atlantic City, New Jersey. The inside of the car was charred and the windows had melted. Luckily, agents were still able to get the vehicle's identification number, and with all of this information, agents headed to Pearlmore Apartments. The apartment's landlady, Viola Mayers, had notified them that Walter Osborne had moved out of his apartment the morning of February 10th. When the agents arrived and searched his apartment, they found handcuffs, boxes, tent poles, and leg irons. Joseph was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and there were still no signs of Adolph's body or whereabouts. By August of 1960, Joseph was living in a boarding house that he rented in a Jewish neighborhood. It was located on the west side of Toronto, and he was currently on his third job in the past 6 months. He continuously had to switch jobs because his previous bosses were catching on to the fact that he would lie on his resume. Joseph soon left town after Adolph's death, and he would leave behind his driver's license, a plastic wallet, his union card from California, and the book Anatomy of Murder by Robert Travers. One of his coworkers would call the police after reading a Reader's Digest story and seeing his photo. Police and FBI agents arrived in Toronto to search his room but were too late. He had already rented a red 1960 Pontiac and headed to Winnipeg. Joseph would spend his 32nd birthday at a hotel in Vancouver under the alias Thomas C. Wainwright. He notified the front desk that he had ordered a typewriter and wanted to be notified when it arrived. While he sat in his room, he wasn't aware there was a Vancouver police constable downstairs speaking to the hotel manager. The constable had heard about the red Pontiac during an FBI briefing that morning. The hotel manager confirmed that the guest was still staying there, and at around 9 a.m., 6 squad cars with both police and FBI agents surrounded the hotel. There was a knock at his door and a voice said, "Typewriter ordered for Mr. Wainwright." He then opened the door to find gun barrels pointed directly at his face. Joseph then dropped his head and said, "I'm your man." He was taken to Jefferson County Jail in Golden and told his jailers that he didn't get any sleep because of how much noise there was. Quote, "I got 5 hours of sleep last night. The doors were banging." Throughout police interviews, he tried to make it seem like he was confused and still hurt over his mother's death. He also wouldn't admit to killing Adolph. He would talk about religion, international politics, and airplanes. Interestingly enough, it would be brought to the court's attention that he had once planned a crime involving an airplane, and he often read books on flying. But that wasn't all. Joseph had a lengthy criminal record prior to Adolph's murder, and that was starting to unravel. In the days leading up to Christmas in 1950, Joseph committed a shocking crime. He picked up a 20-year-old sergeant who was hitchhiking from Hamilton Air Force Base, located near San Francisco, and shot the young man twice in the head. The sergeant's body was later discovered in Marin County, and Joseph was apprehended shortly thereafter while driving a stolen vehicle in Beverly Hills. He confessed to the murder, initially claiming it was an act of self-defense, but later revised his account, asserting that it was a failed robbery attempt. Interestingly enough, before committing this crime, Joseph was headed to medical school. Mental health professionals and journalists alike speculated whether the traumatic loss of his mother had driven him to this violent act. Initially, his father deemed the arrest an error, but he later expressed to a reporter, quote, "If he did it, somewhere along the line, something had snapped inside of him." In the spring of 1951, Joseph entered a guilty plea for first-degree murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment. He spent a year at San Quentin State Prison, where he was assessed with an IQ of 148, and often referenced Nietzsche's philosophy of might makes right. If you're not aware, might makes right, or might is right, essentially means that those who are powerful can do what they wish and not be punished even if their action is unjustified. Following his time at San Quentin, Joseph was transferred to a mental health facility on Terminal Island. Following his time at San Quentin, Joseph was transferred to a mental health facility on Terminal Island, California, where he was characterized by doctors as high-strung, markedly schizoid, and abnormal. Psychiatrists cautioned that he exhibited the potential for explosive and uncontrolled emotional outbursts. In April 1955, Joseph was released from the prison hospital and moved to a minimum security cell. Despite the gravity of his situation, his time in prison was not devoid of positive developments. His father, along with his new wife, Helen Marie, visited him regularly, and this allowed father and son to begin mending their strained relationship. During these visits, Joseph often steered conversations towards his aspirations of completing his undergraduate education. However, on August 1st, 1955, just 4 years after his incarceration, Joseph executed a daring escape from his minimum security cell. Disguised in clothing he had concealed in a laundry cart, he managed to open a window screen and vanish without a trace. Weeks later, he resurfaced in Los Angeles, where he assumed his brother's identity and secured employment at an ice company. He took out a life insurance policy, naming his friend Joseph Corbett Sr. as the beneficiary, and joined a labor union. Although he maintained a low profile, Joseph remained vigilant for an opportunity to start anew. On a whim that December, he packed a suitcase and set off for Denver. Shortly after his arrival in Denver, Joseph rented apartment 305 at the Pearlmore Apartments, acquired a driver's license at the Division of Motor Vehicles, and began searching for employment under the alias Walter Osborne. He fabricated a story about having a wife, whom he named after his mother, which was a complete fabrication, and the following spring he secured a position at Benjamin Moore, triumphing over 117 other candidates in the process. As he settled into his new life, Joseph grew increasingly confident in his ability to seamlessly blend into the fabric of society, effectively hiding in plain sight. Joseph had been stalking Adolph for 4 years and meticulously planning to kidnap him. Joseph's trial began in 1961 and lasted 13 days. The district attorney, Ronald J. Hartstein, pursued a first-degree murder conviction due to the geological evidence that was found under his car. Adolph's wife, Mary, also testified at the trial. It was very heartfelt and brief, but news outlets would mention that it would be felt throughout the entire trial. Joseph's attorneys would say he was a victim of circumstance and was only guilty of being an already wanted man that only fled because of federal police scrutiny following Adolph's abduction. According to them, the added police pressure would automatically convict an escaped felon, and the fact that he continuously moved was coincidental. Joseph, however, didn't testify on his own behalf. He also sat still throughout the trial. Luckily, he was sentenced to life in prison. Adolph Coors' remains were cremated shortly after they were found and scattered over Aspen Mountain. A few months after the murder, Mary Coors moved back to Denver with her kids and sold her family's Morrison Ranch for $200,000. As time went on, Adolph's parents seemed to distance themselves from her, and their son, Adolph IV, later wrote a letter to his grandfather, comparing him to another Adolf, Adolf Hitler. Mary faced more hardships. Her eldest daughter, Mary Brooke, passed away from cancer in 1968 at 26 and was buried at Fairmount Cemetery in Denver. 7 years later, Mary Coors joined her daughter there after a fall at a friend's house in Aspen. She was 60 years old. By the early 1970s, Joseph was nearing the record for being the longest incarcerated prisoner at Cannon City. Joseph's jailers began to wonder if his debt was paid. He held a position in the prison hospital using his skills as a licensed X-ray technician and was credited with contributing to the well-being of numerous fellow inmates. Concurrently, in the state of Colorado, lawmakers initiated a review of the concept of life sentences. This review culminated in a change to the law in 1973, stipulating that any inmate who had served a minimum of 10 years would be granted a parole hearing. Starting in 1978, Adolph Coors IV, the son of Adolph, visited Cannon City 3 times, but Joseph turned down each meeting. Adolph Coors IV, a born-again Christian, struggled after his father's death. On his last visit, knowing Joseph wouldn't meet him, he slipped a note into a Bible and gave it to a guard saying, quote, "I want to forgive you for what you did to my family, and I ask for your forgiveness for the hatred we've had for you all of these years." Less than 20 years after the murder, Joseph asked for work release. He told the parole board, quote, "I think the circumstantial evidence against me could apply to anyone. Staying in prison longer wouldn't help me become a better person. I've reached my limit. And on December 12, 1980, Joseph Corbett Jr. was surprisingly released. Joseph would soon be diagnosed with cancer, and on August 24, 2009, at the age of 80, he died by suicide by a single gunshot wound to the head. There's a 5280 article by Robert Sanchez that describes his first-hand experience with Joseph, and I'm going to read parts of it to you. Quote, I met Joseph once, and it is a memory that will stay with me forever. It was in the last moments before my story on Joseph and his role in the Coors murder was to go to print. I'd visited Joseph's apartment on Federal Boulevard at least a dozen times last summer, and though I always thought he was behind the door, he didn't open it. I won't go through all of the details, you can read them in the feature which I ran in February of 2009, but here's the gist. After culling hundreds of pages of FBI reports, newspaper clips, and even his jailhouse letters, I'd come to know Joseph, perhaps as few others had. Just when I thought I had him pinned, he finally opened the door. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a grandpa. His face was long, his shoulders sloped. I found myself staring at his arms, the wrinkled flesh dangling from the bone. He was wearing a tattered white t-shirt and some threadbare slacks. I'd come to meet a murderer, but seeing him so worn and so beaten, I strangely began to feel sorry for him. Though he didn't let me into his studio apartment, I could see inside the single room. It was as if time had stopped somewhere around 1985, which of course, it had for Joseph. In his last decades, he rarely ventured out. He stopped working at some point in his 80s, he drove a truck for the Salvation Army, and then checked out from society. In his doorway, we made small talk, and I asked if I could interview him. It's nothing personal, he told me. I have nothing to gain from the notoriety. I've put it behind me. It's a gruesome memory. I ended my story this way. Joseph then smiled meekly. He shook my hand and thanked me for visiting, then closed the door and disappeared into his small apartment, a man alone in the twilight of his existence, voluntarily confined to a prison of his own making. And that was the rest of the article, but it's just really interesting to me because Joseph has claimed he's innocent throughout all of his time in and out of prison, and his neighbors would actually nod and whisper that he was the guy that killed Adolph Coors III. He also mentioned that he had a lifelong fascination with the Lindbergh kidnapping of 1932, which is the biggest red flag in my opinion. And while doing research on this case, I actually stumbled across articles about the founder of Coors, which is Adolph Jr.'s grandfather. So his name, of course, is also Adolph. And to make sure you don't get confused, we'll refer to him as retired Adolph. In 1929, retired Adolph's body was found on the grounds of the Cavalier Hotel. The coroner wouldn't conduct an autopsy, which raised suspicion that he was possibly murdered, just like his grandson. Apparently, the windows in his hotel room had been locked from the inside, which has led people to believe he may have been murdered before being thrown out of the window. Retired Adolph was staying on the 6th floor, and many employees have reported odd noises and encounters, particularly on this floor. It is said that there are unexplained cold spots, random windows open at night, and there are voices and shuffling noises that come from his room. An older bellman on the stairs leading up to the 5th floor has also been reported for warning guests of ghosts upstairs. However, the Cavalier hasn't hired anyone that matches this description. And I know what you're thinking, because I was thinking this too, but is the family cursed? Because the more and more I researched, I just found myself feeling so bad for the Coors family and everything that they went through. I was actually in Colorado while researching this case, and I wanted to visit the brewery, but we spent our time there hiking. And there are so many articles that dive into the Coors family history, so if you have time to read more, I'll include links in the show notes. It is so unfortunate that Adolph ended up in a bad position for simply helping someone out, and I couldn't help but think about how hard this must have been for his wife and kids. So what do you guys think? Do you guys think his grandfather was murdered? Do you believe in family curses? Let me know in the comments or on our Instagram. As always, all evidence will be linked in the show notes. Feel free to follow our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast and my personal at Annalisa. I also just opened up a Buy Me a Coffee page, so if you'd like to do so and support the podcast, the link is in the show notes, but please don't feel like you have to. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you on the next one.